filming the session, if anybody doesn't want their picture to appear on the filming, if you'd just like to turn off your camera, that would be great. Thank you. So Zoe will do, and I'll introduce Zoe in a second. Zoe will do a presentation shortly, and then there will be the opportunity to ask questions at the end. So if we can use the hands up option, that would be fantastic. And also, if you don't want to speak up within the session, you can use the chat box option, and we'll run through those. So I'd like to introduce you to Zoe Fullagar. First of all, I asked her how she wanted to be introduced to the session, and first and foremost, she's a mother, daughter, sister, and grandma. And Zoe is our ICC manager for Copeland, and she has very kindly agreed to discuss her journey as a parent of a transgender man. And I'll hand over to Zoe. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Yeah, so this is a big move for me to share my story. First and foremost, what I do want to do is just explain to anybody who doesn't know that behind me in my background is the Pride flag. This is Pride Month, and Lisa's doing an amazing job to raise awareness for us this month. But some of you might not know that in actual fact, all the colours of the Pride flag have a meaning. And you can see them behind me. I just want you to have a little look so you know. Pink is for sex, red is for life, orange is for healing, yellow is for sunlight, green is for nature, turquoise is for magic or art, indigo is for serenity, and the violet is for spirit. I've shared this flag all month because I want to promote what Pride is about, and it isn't just about the diversity that we've got in this group of people. We need to recognise all these colours, and all these elements are so important. I'm going to also just quickly share with you, because in my office, I don't just have the Pride flag, I have the Progress flag, because I am the mum of a trans son who I love tremendously. So hopefully you'll be able to see this now, because this flag is slightly different. It shares the Pride colours, but what you'll also see is that we've got the chevron design. Now, this was developed, it was really important. It wanted to recognise not just Pride, but also to recognise the marginalised communities within the LGBTQ+ community. So you've got the black and the brown, which is recognition of people of colour, and the white, pink and the blue is the recognition of our transgender community. The chevron's situated on the left to show that there is progress to be made, but it is pointing to the right to show that we are actually making progress. So I just wanted to start with that for everybody, because, you know, this is what we're talking about. This is the Pride Month. Now, my talk today is very much about being the mum of a trans son. And I apologise in advance because I get very emotional, and that is completely normal. And I don't want anybody to worry about me. It's fine. I've asked my son Jay for permission to do this. I've printed everything out that I'm going to talk about today. And he read through it and he said, Mum, if there's anything I can do to help anybody else, that's what I'm going to do. You know, so he's really happy. He's really happy. I'm going to show you a little presentation because I'm also going to show you some pictures of my son. It's an absolute privilege to be his mum. So I'm just going to read you through what my story was, okay, and what it still is. So in October 2002, I gave birth to my third child. He arrived in a storm. It was quite an experience. We weren't the most connected family. He arrived into a bit of a maelstrom. I had two older daughters who were 10 and 12 at the time. So I thought I knew what parenting was about. I thought, you know what? I've been a full-time childminder for 4.5 years, looking up to 9 children a day. I got this parenting thing nailed. Well, you know what? Nothing could have prepared me for the next journey I took as a parent. It really, really couldn't. If you ask me to describe who Jay is as a child, as a baby, all I could tell you is he was miserable. He was unhappy. There was nothing that seemed to let him find joy in life. He used to cry inconsolably for hours and hours. I felt drained and exhausted by it all. I went back to work. I continued to feel exhausted and drained. There was just nothing that I could do as a parent that seemed to make him feel happy. But then I had another son, and that sort of restored my faith because he was a more contented child. So then it made me feel that it wasn't actually my parenting abilities. Perhaps there was something about Jay that was a bit different. I didn't know what it was. Time went by and my relationship with Jay's father irretrievably broke down, and I chose to move to Cumbria to be closer to my parents. Jay remained a really unhappy child with a lot of issues. He'd not had any imaginative play as a toddler or as a young child, and we later understood this to be due to issues of neurodiversity. Jay hated shopping for clothes in particular. He was happier in school as he could wear trousers and ostensibly be wearing the same as all the boys. He was in a year group that was overwhelmingly male. There were 7 boys to only 3 girls. So I didn't think deeply into the fact that Jay seemed to prefer more traditional male types of play. His closest friend was a boy and they shared neurodiversity. So again, I put it down to this. Jay never liked any traditional female toys or games, but in a small school situated in a rural setting and heavily influenced by the farming and the countryside all around it, it wasn't really a problem. Jay's first encounter with CAMS was at the age of 7. He was diagnosed with depression and had a course of play therapy to try and help. Ostensibly, the reason was put down to the fact that he was processing feelings around a traumatic separation and divorce from his father. He was discharged after 6 months and we continued on as a family, but he still was not a very happy child. In 2014, Jay was lucky enough to gain a place at St Bees School, a private school that was nearby, and sadly this was short-lived as the school closed after its first year. This year was so challenging for Jay as the uniform was very gender specific. And he was a weekly boarder, so was in a house with lots of other girls. He eventually went on to self-harm quite considerably and was again referred to CAMS for support. He received counselling from a therapist for depression for nearly a year and was again discharged. Shortly after commencing Year 8 in Millham, Jay felt able to come out to me. It was not a moment a parent forgets. I was ironing on a Sunday afternoon and he came into my room and with his brother in the background to explain that he believed he was transgender. This was a monumental moment for me. How was I going to respond? What was I going to say to him? How could I quash all of my feelings and be the mum he needed me to be? Needless to say, I probably didn't respond in the best way. If you'd asked him, he would have said that I didn't give him the response he wished for, but it was the one I could process at the time. I was full of questions, and who else could I ask them of but of him? How long had he felt like this? When he explained that he was unhappy in his skin, I could only think of how unhappy I had been when I'd been his age. But it didn't make me want to be a different gender. This wasn't helpful thinking and certainly not what my child needed to hear. He wanted me to use a different name for him that he had already chosen. I could not begin to explain to him how this felt like a knife in my heart. I'd spent so long deliberating over choosing the name for him when he was first born. He wanted something that was his own, but I wanted something that was meaning and honouring the generations of my family before, as in the name that I had picked for him. When he decided that name without me able to input, he chose a name that had some really negative emotions at the time over some professional situation that I was in. I couldn't tell him. We had to come to a compromise. So he'd chosen his name and we compromised that I would call him Jay. And that's the name that stuck to this day. However, we did talk a bit about the name, and I talked to him about how I thought of the names that he was going to have had he been a boy. And much to my pleasure, he chose to use one of those names. So Jay is now officially Jacob Reuben Fullagar. Reuben I loved because it meant red-headed man. And you know what? That is who he turned out to be, was my red-headed man. So how do you come to terms with all of the change and support my child to be the best he could be? Well, what I needed to start doing was to tell my family. But where did I begin to broach this very challenging topic in a way that was supportive for Jay, but also for my family? Because the one thing I knew as a mum is Jay was not in isolation here. He sat part of a very big blended family, and we all loved him. Unsurprisingly, I've got a number of children. As some of you know, some of them aren't all biologically mine. Some of them are my bonus children. And they responded in the most dismissive way. Why would I be concerned about their response? They came to me and said, Mum, you know, we've known. Why are you worried? So that was a real relief. The only immediate issue I had was that my eldest daughter was getting married and she was planning a large event in a stately home and was expecting Jay to be one of the bridesmaids. It took a lot of talking and negotiating and significant compromise on Jay's behalf to get through the experience and to share a memorable, beautiful day with our family. I was finding it so hard to use that name Jay that he'd chosen. But you know what? The time came after the wedding that I really needed to acknowledge that Jay was Jacob. So it's only as I reflect now that I realise what a terrible, hard decision I had to make as a mum, because I needed to be able to let go of my child and I needed to welcome a new child. So shortly after the wedding, Jay started at Milham School in year 8. He went into year 8 when we knew that he was transgender. But at some point, you know, he'd had a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and it was time for me to acknowledge and let him make his transition. As I reflect now, this year's been a really tough year in my family because in February I lost my father. And what I recognise now is I had a day back in 2014 and late 2014 where I had to make the same decision for Jay as I did for my dad. And that was to let him go. So for Jay, I knocked on his bedroom door one night and I said to him, come downstairs. Jay didn't question me. He had no idea what I was about to do. But what I ended up doing was to cut off all of his beautiful waist-long ginger hair. I had to make that change for him. And some of you might think it was an inconsiderate and selfish act. I cut that hair off and I put that hair in the bin. I couldn't do any more. I needed to let him go and I couldn't dwell on it. It was a very difficult decision and it was a hard place for Jay to be. Whilst it was something that he wanted, he could see how visibly distressed I was. Bless him, for many years, he called it my Britney Spears moment. I vicariously lived my Britney Spears moment through him. And it's only more recently that I've had to explain to him, since my father died, I could explain to him that in actual fact, that was my act of letting go of my daughter and welcoming my trans son. And to this day, you'll see how painful it is. But you know what? That's part of my journey. And this is why I want to share it with you all, because it's not easy. It's really not easy. But you know what? It can be the most amazing, rewarding experience. So that moment went on and Jay carried on, but he was still really unhappy, despite the fact, and I thought I'd done everything I could. I'd acknowledged that he was my trans son now. We'd had some negotiation, massive compromise on his behalf around his name, but he was really still unhappy in his skin. And very sadly, one day he ran away from home, fully intending to end his life. He couldn't take it anymore. He was so unhappy. I found he had left home very quickly, thank goodness. And I jumped in the car. This was just the most traumatic experience for me to explain to you. And I thought the last lot was traumatic, but so what happened was I got in the car. I was desperate. I knew Jay was really suicidal. I knew he had fully planned how to end his life. I got in the car and I drove and I drove and I found him about a mile from home. And to this day, I have never forgotten the image in my head. I had him in the headlights of my car. He was clearly incredibly distressed and was not for stopping. I tried to shout at him. He just kept screaming at me to leave him alone. And in my headlights, I could see my son and I could see a wall. And I wanted to make the most awful decision. What do? Do I run my son over, or do I let him run away and end his life? And my decision was to actually run my son over. I thought I would rather have him with broken legs and alive than hanging from a tree. That was my decision. And that is not an easy one, and it lives with me to this day. Luckily, I only had to pin him against the wall, and Jay realised how very serious I was, and he got back in the car. I drove back home. We barely spoke. He was distressed, and I was distressed. When we got back home, I sent him upstairs to his room so he could have some space and I could have a cup of tea and calm down. Within 45 minutes, there were blue lights outside my house, and 2 paramedics walked up to my side gate. They told me that they'd received a phone call from a young man in my house, and I knew exactly what had happened. I took them straight in and said, "It'll be Jay. He's taken an overdose," which he had, a very large overdose. So yet again, we went in and we were admitted into the children's ward with a very distressed son. But for us, that was our pivotal moment. That was as dark as it could get for me and for Jay. We were referred yet again to CAMHS. So this was our 3rd round of treatment. But we couldn't have been more blessed than the day I got a phone call from an amazing practitioner called Rebecca, who said, "I'm training to do family therapy as part of my work with CAMHS, and I've read your story and I think I can help." And boy, did she. That was our moment where we started our family therapy together. We acknowledged that if we were going to help and support Jay, we had to do this together. We attended our sessions, myself, Jay, and my younger son, sometimes joined by my 2nd daughter as well, and occasionally by my bonus daughter when she was in the area. It was through this time that we acknowledged Jay's gender dysphoria as an official diagnosis. We finally got the referral that we needed to go and explore Jay's gender dysphoria. We were referred to the Tavistock and Portman Clinic, and that's this. I will tell you, this is known as GIDS. I will refer to it as GIDS. It's the Gender Identity Development Service. Through this service, we were supported by an enhanced social worker and a clinical psychologist, and they were amazing. They supported us as a family throughout the journey from 2017 onwards. So we've been with GIDS for a long, long time. And I can absolutely tell you, it was the best thing. It was amazing. So we explored Jay's his gender dysphoria. And Mate, the enhanced social worker, at our first meeting, made an analogy of us as a family on our journey, that we were all on a racetrack and we were all different people and we were all different characters. Jay was the hare and I was the tortoise. And do you know what? That analogy has supported me moving forward. You know, I'm on that journey. It's a roller coaster. It has its ups and it has its downs. But throughout this, I am that tortoise on that journey with Jay. We're on the racetrack. We are all going to end up at the same point, but we're just going to go at different speeds. It's not been easy. A lot of counselling for Jay and a lot of counselling for me as a mum. It's been a difficult 4 years to explore this. He had a bit of a breakdown a couple of years ago in 2016, and the counselling progress was paused because it was actually, as they identified, more important that we address the issues that Jay had at the time, which was about his identity. Where could he live? Where he could live by stealth. He didn't want it to be known that he was trans. He wanted to live as a teenage boy. So he thought if he moved away and moved in with his father, that he could have this fresh start. He came to the dawning realization that wasn't ever going to happen, that he couldn't really do that. It wasn't going to work for him. So he was devastated that, in actual fact, the advice that came from GIDS was that we needed to slow down his counselling and slow down the process. So for me as a mum, when Jay came to the decision that in actual fact he was going to stay in Cumbria, he was going to stay with me, I was pleased because I felt I could offer him the support that he really needed. I could offer that tender listening ear that he needed, because he needs to grow into the person and the man that he is now. The process carried on, but as part of that, I needed to acknowledge that there were going to be some physical changes and some physical steps that needed to be taken. For me, again, this is incredibly emotional because I nurtured and carried a beautiful child for 9 months, and he isn't happy in the person I created. And it's very difficult for me to explain to him at times how painful that is. I've had to lose my beautiful daughter after 12 years and welcome my trans son. And I do welcome him, but I will continue to grieve for my lost daughter. And he acknowledges that. He allows me to keep pictures of him before he transitioned in my bedroom, because I don't want to wipe out my 12 years that I had with that daughter. But I have plenty of pictures of my trans son in my house too, because he is still part of that family and he is still the same person, just looks a bit different. But then a lot of our teenagers look awfully different to when they did as toddlers. So you know what? I can liken it to that. It's fine. I've got teenagers, I've had teenagers before. I accept the dyed hair, the stretched ears, the tattoos. He's expressing himself. So that's sort of the other things I really need to sort of share with you is, so I am divorced from Jay's father, but how do I explain to Jay's father what all this entails? He didn't understand it. We had a very acrimonious divorce. He felt I was a bad mum. He felt that that the neurodiversity was just down to my poor parenting, and what the heck was I doing with his daughter, that his daughter felt that in fact they were a trans son. I was failing. But that's not his issue. That's not my issue, sorry, it's his issue. It is, I feel more assured now that I am the best parent that my sons have ever needed than ever before. They frequently tell me, Mum, why do I need 2 parents when I've got you? That is a beautiful thing to hear, whilst I also acknowledge it would have been nicer to have shared that with a father for them. But it's okay. We are a close, tight-knit family. So where are we now? Well, I have the most handsome and loving trans son who still loves me as much as ever. Yes, he's a teenager. Yes, he drives me insane at times, but he's still my son. Yes, I worry for his future, like all parents do for all of their children. We just have the little added extra bits, that I wonder, is he going to be discriminated against? What can I do to protect him? He needs to grow away. We all feel like that as parents. We want to protect our children. I want to protect Jay, and I don't know how sometimes, but I just keep doing the best job I can. What I can tell you over losing my daughter and gaining my trans son is that it eases with time. So as time goes by and we grieve the loved ones that we have lost, we build more memories. And as the years have gone by and I've built more memories of Jay than I had before he was transitioned, it's become a little easier. It has become a little easier. But sometimes I reflect on that journey and I am sad that my mum didn't join me on the journey. My mum was diagnosed with Alzheimer's type dementia at the start of Jay's journey. It was a real challenge because mum was never going to understand. She just always remembered me having a son and a daughter that lived at home with us, as well as my 2 grown-up daughters that lived away. And for many years, Jay had to face the fact that I still had to talk about him in his what's now known as a dead name because my mum couldn't understand it. And he fully compromised with me about that because I didn't want to cause my mum undue distress in her journey with dementia. My mum lives in a residential home now, and her memory is so lost now. She doesn't remember me or my children. She sees me and she loves me, which is beautiful. But I can now tell her that Jacob is her grandson because she can't remember any of her grandchildren anyway. But Jacob is the most amazing support to my mum. When we were in lockdown and visiting slowly opened into the care homes, and a few months ago we were allowed to have 2 visitors, Jay was the first one to say, "Mum, I want to come and see Grandmama." What a pleasure it was. It was a real privilege to share that with him, that he could come and spend time with his grandmama. And his grandmama loves him, just as I love him. That is where we are today. And what I am going to do is I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope this shows for you because I'm going to share you some pictures of my son, which he's given me permission to share. So you will have to tell me if you can see those now. Can somebody just let me know if they can see them?
Yeah, so we can see the full presentation.
Fantastic. Okay, so I'm going to show you. This is, let me just try. Oh, sorry, I'm going to try and work out how I can go from the beginning. There we go. So I'm going to show you. Welcome to my beautiful Jacob. And we're on Drigg Beach. All of these photos I took this year because I want you to see that he's a beautiful, happy person. He's cheeky, he's rude, he challenges me, and he makes me laugh endlessly. The picture on the left, you'll see there, sorry about all the coats hanging up in my kitchen, but that was taken on the day of my dad's funeral. And my sons look so handsome. And I'm so proud of them for the way they support their grandmama. They love her to pieces. In the middle, Jay with our new dog, Milo, who just adores him. And on the right is the picture of Jay and I by my dad's grave. As you'll see now, Jay is further through his transition. He is taking testosterone now. He's growing facial hair. The downside to that is he dyes his hair on his head, so he has to dye his beard as well. So I'm getting to learn all about just for men, because apparently you can dye beards too. The last one I want to share with you, the picture on the right is the most recent picture I took a few weeks ago. He is such a cheeky so-and-so. And on the left is one that he shares on his social media with the devil horns. I think describes him beautifully. So I'm just going to come through and end that presentation, and I hope you have all found that useful and helpful. I apologise for my tears, but equally I don't apologise because you know what? That's about the journey, isn't it? So has anybody got any questions?
First of all, just thank you so much, Zoe, for sharing your story. I know we discussed it prior to you kindly agreeing to do this session, and at the time you completely moved me. So yeah, just thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's an absolute pleasure. I do also want to say to anybody, if they want to ask me questions outside of this meeting, please feel free to email me. I'm on the global. Please make the most of it.
So if we open up for questions, has anybody got anything that they'd like to ask Zoe?
Stony silence.
Oh, we've got Amanda Sutton.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi Zoe, thank you so much for sharing. That was incredibly emotional, and I share with you. Congratulations on getting through that with minimal tears. You did well. My question, obviously we've spoken a lot in the past anyway, and we know each other, but just for the kind of wider audience, what would you recommend anyone who you know, in work you must have gone through an emotional journey yourself, and that must have been really hard to have to then share that, like, you know, how are you feeling and why are you feeling like that? What can we learn from what you've gone through, and how can we support other parents going through similar?
Thank you, Amanda. Well, that is exactly the reason I've done this. What I can tell you is, as a parent, your journey is dictated by the needs of your child. So for a long time, I had to respect that Jay wanted to live by stealth. He did not want people to know, and he didn't want me to talk about it. So I actually couldn't get the help and the support I needed. For me, that was phenomenally difficult, especially when we were going through the period of time when he was suicidal. I was sitting in a governance and ops meeting one day in Cleatormore. I will never forget it. And I got the phone call from school to say that my son had rocked up with numerous empty packets of paracetamol and 3 suicide notes. And I had to walk out of a meeting and just go and deal with that, and then come back and not really be able to explain to people why. People who have children going through this, these guys very often, they do self-harm, they are suicidal, and to access help is very difficult. It's really important that they have the conversation with their children that they need support too, but they can do that without divulging exactly why they need the support, especially when you're dealing with children that are self-harming and suicidal and very depressed. It's only more recently that I've been able to access support through GIDS, which has been an absolute godsend. CAMS has been phenomenal to give me a safe space to be able to talk about my concerns, because whilst it's family therapy, you don't always spend all the time in a room together. Sometimes as part of that family therapy, you do have separate sessions that you need. And more often than not, it was my need rather than Jay's need. There are some support groups that are in Cumbria, but I'm going to be really honest with you, is that the support groups that I was able to access, they weren't right for me. So I went to one group in particular, and I'll be honest, I felt like I'd walked into a parallel universe. It was full of rainbows and diversity, and it wasn't where I needed to be. I needed to speak to other parents who were trying to hold down a job, keep a household going, try to hold down that professional career, as well as deal with all of these challenges. And I couldn't at the time embrace all of these rainbow issues, as my son had called them over the years. And I also, you know, there's the bigger groups like Mermaids, which are great for some people, but for me, they felt very militant. I'm not about beating my chest to say we need to stand up for the rights of trans people. I'm a mum. That's who I am. I need to look after my trans son, and I need to allow him to learn to live in the real world that we live in. I want to raise him the same as I've done all of my children, and I don't want to lose sight of all of my other children because of Jay being a transgender man. I want to be a normal family, whatever that might be. I am the most diverse blended family, as you know, and I love it. I absolutely love it. What I have learned is that being able to talk now is healing for me. It's really beneficial, and sharing this now and feeling like I can provide a voice for other parents within our trust and perhaps within the wider remit of Cumbria, and create something that is real and supportive and understanding and talks about how it feels when your child tells you. How do you allow them to make that move and acknowledge your grief? Because it is a grieving process. You know, it's so important. So that's why I'm here and what I'm doing. Does that answer? I hope that's been useful for people.
I think it's been great, Zoe. Thank you. Just a question from myself, really. So, what was it? How did it feel when you first took Jay shopping for new clothes?
Well, yeah, I tell you, the things you don't realise when you have a trans son. How the heck do you go shopping? What about those male changing rooms that are communal? Oh my goodness. So all of a sudden, you've acknowledged that you need to address this. You need to take your son out, but you want to have the same experiences as every other mum of a teenage son. But you've got to think about, what shops can you use? Which shops actually have cubicles where he can be safe? And not only can he be safe, but also for the other men that are using those areas. So it felt very uncomfortable, but not because I was embarrassed about my son at all, but because I was worried about keeping everybody safe. And it's the same as the first time you go out with your trans son and he needs to go to the loo. Where does he go? Does he use a disabled toilet? He's not disabled. He's my trans son. Does he use a male toilet? Does that leave him vulnerable? What about all the other men that need to use that toilet? Are you putting them at risk in any way, shape or form? And what on earth would women think if you took your trans son into a ladies' toilet? These are the real challenging questions that every one of us who is a parent of a trans child has to consider. There are various routes around it. Yes, you can use disabled toilets and defend your space, but then you equally cannot divulge why your child needs to use that disabled toilet, because they don't want everybody to know they're trans. They want to get on and be seen as the teenage boy or the man that they are. And what I didn't know until more recently, which has really raised a few eyebrows, is in some of our nighttime venues, in the male toilets, there are no cubicles. There are only urinals. So what the heck does Jay do? Anyway, I've promised him I'm going to buy him a penis for his next birthday. Did you know you can buy them? They're awesome. They're amazing. I found out stuff I never knew. They're called peacocks. So I'm going to get him a peacock. And it's rather interesting. I get to choose with my son what his penis is going to look like. That's really quite a funny place to be.
Zoe, has Jay received any discrimination since? Well, has he received any discrimination?
He's been really lucky. I live in a small rural community that doesn't really ask questions. They just go with the flow. So locally, I've been really lucky. In actual fact, his work experience, he actually did back in his primary school. And he loved going back and being called Mr. Fullagar because it was great. And there were families there that remembered Jay at school before he transitioned. They've embraced him. Yes, he has had some discrimination. That's been challenging. And he is very pragmatic in his approach to it. You know, he comes home, he tells me about it. He tells me it's their issue, not his. And you know what? Anybody that discriminates against my son is the poorer person for it because they're missing out on a very wonderful person.
Thanks, Zoe. Has anybody else got any questions before we move to the chat box? No, I'm not missing any hands, am I? No.
I think everybody's too busy Googling what the heck a peacock is.
Oh, brilliant. I'll move into the chat box now, Zoe, and we'll just read out some questions and comments that have been made throughout the session for you.
Thank you.
So Nikki Britton Nelson has said, "Wow, right beside you, Zoe." Marty, oh, that was just around a bit of housekeeping. That's great. Zoe Lamore, you're amazing, Zoe.
Oh, thank you.
Nikki again, he's a fine young man, so handsome, and a credit to you.
Oh, Nikki knows him. Nikki knows him well.
Kim Taylor, oh my God, Zoe, just like Rachel last week, that was an amazing session, heartfelt and so insightful. Well done and thank you.
You're welcome.
Jenny Griffiths, thank you so much, Zoe. What a privilege to be able to listen to you. I have to leave now to charity meeting, but we'll listen to the recording later. Amazing. Sophie Coots has said, so inspirational, emotional and honest. Thank you so much for sharing, Zoe. How receptive were parents' children at the school Jay went to of your journey? I think you've just covered that. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Oh, do you know what? It's so in our local community, both my younger sons have neurodiversity, which, believe you me, is far more of an issue than Jay's gender dysphoria. I can absolutely tell you. But yeah, on the whole, parents have been okay. Jay has actually had a couple of girlfriends. His first girlfriend, her family absolutely would not accept Jay, which was, we just had to take that one on the chin, you know. And so his girlfriend, unfortunately, used to lie about where she went to come and spend time with Jay, which, you know, I wasn't happy about, but these were two young people who loved each other. They did go their own separate ways. And then Jay's next girlfriend, Jay was very accepted within the family. And although they split up for about a year, they are actually, in fact, back together again. In fact, that's where Jay is at the moment. He's off spending time with Maya. And they're a really happy couple that really are, for this moment in their lives, both at 18, they are a real support for each other. And Maya has indeed been down to Gids and supported Jay over the years with that. So, yeah, I mean, families do accept Jay now as he is, which is fine. We don't seem to have any issues.
Great. Just to go back to the chat box then, so Jeanette Peary has said, thank you so much for sharing, Zoe. What a hard but worthwhile journey for both of you. Amanda Place, thanks so much, Zoe. Amazing as always. Pam Griffiths, you are amazing, Zoe, and you're doing a fabulous job as a parent. You should be so proud of all that you have achieved. Jean Hill, thank you, Zoe. That was so moving. Emma Meekley, thank you so much, Zoe. A lovely presentation of a very difficult experience for you all. Jennifer McCall, thank you so much, Zoe, for sharing your story. I don't know how you held back the tears so well. What an amazing story of being a strong, loving, supportive mother. I shed a tear hearing your story. It was truly moving. Thank you so much for having the courage to share your story. Wendy Forster, thank you for this very powerful account of your journey. You've done so well and come so far. We've got a little GIF in there from Emma Meekley, so I'll let you look at that after the session. Maria Stevens, thank.
Oh, did she just freeze at the wrong moment?
She has.
Oh, two ticks. I'll have a quick whiz into the box. Oh dear.
I think Lisa's just frozen. But I can continue. Kim Taylor said brilliant. Nikki added, Zoe, you're an amazing mum, colleague and friend. So proud of you. And that's the end of the chat box so far. So I think the overall consensus, Zoe, is that you're doing a great job. There's just one more added in from Linda Turner. She says, you are incredible, Zoe, and it helped me reflect that we do not know what our colleagues are working through in their family lives, and more reason to look after each other.
That is absolutely exactly where I'm coming from. There is a few other things I want us to reflect, because what we all are is we are all professional people working within this health trust. Okay. So I can tell you from a health perspective, it was just something that we don't necessarily think about. And I do think we need to start thinking as a trust about how we approach this, and we need to talk to our communities about how we address this. My son, Jay, as a baby, had some problems with his hips, so he was x-rayed. So as he started on his journey of transition and hormone blockers, he was developing hip pain and he needed to go to be x-rayed. Now, this is about us learning something. All Jay's medical records say he's Mr. Jacob Fullagar. He went in for his hip x-ray, and guess where they put the lead shielding? Because they didn't know that he actually was born a female. There must be a way where we can do this better. We can do this in a respectful way for our trans colleagues, but also keeping them safe. That's just a little story that we need to think about what we're doing. In everything we do, we need to check in with our trans communities to say, you know, we've got to be here to support you and keep you healthy and well. There is an element where we need to know what's going on. We respect your right to live in the gender that you're comfortable in, but we also need to consider from a health perspective how we support you. And that includes, let's consider that trans women and trans men actually do need to sometimes get support for their gender health. And that's around their birth gender, not their actual gender. How do we do that, and how do we keep them cared for better? I'm considering now, my son's made the decision that we've had to have very serious discussions about fertility and whether he ever wants to have a family. And he's made the decision at this point, which I think is very hard for any 18-year-old to make, is that he never wants to have children. That's a tough decision. But what if he changes his mind and he does need to have support? How does he go through our gynecological services as a trans man? So I think I wanted to park that as a thought for us all to think about as we go out now into our workplaces, what can we do to actually acknowledge and support anybody that we're caring for?
That's great, thank you, Zoe, and that's a really strong message that you end with there. Is there? Sorry about that. My system just completely crashed there halfway through. The joys of technology. Has anybody got any final comments or questions or anything that they'd like to ask Zoe? No. That's fantastic. Oh well, thank you all very much for attending. Like we said, we are recording this session, and they will both Friday's session and today's session will be made available on the Staff Network web pages on the LGBT plus section. Again, thank you so much, Zoe, for delivering the session.
You're welcome.
And yeah, we'll be in touch as well.
Fab. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Zoe.